On November 18, 1978, in the heart of the Guyanese jungle, history bore witness to one of the most chilling events of the 20th century. Over 900 men, women, and children, not dragged, not forced, but willingly drank a cyanide-laced beverage and laid down to die. There was no visible violence, no guns pointed to their heads, just silence and death. This wasn't a battlefield, it wasn't a prison. It was a place called Jonestown, a settlement that began as a promise of utopia and ended in mass suicide. And at the center of it all stood Jim Jones, a charismatic preacher turned self-proclaimed prophet. He didn't command an army. He didn't conquer a nation. He simply used words. With nothing but his voice, his sermons, and carefully woven lies, he led over 900 people to believe that death was better than doubt. Some were doctors, some were teachers, many were educated, rational individuals, and yet they followed. The question we must ask is not just, why did they die? The real question is, how could they believe? How could hundreds of seemingly intelligent people fall so completely into delusion that they marched toward their own end without resistance? We like to think intelligence is a shield, that education protects us from foolishness. But Jonestown tells us otherwise, and perhaps even more disturbingly, it's a pattern we've seen again. Time and time again, throughout history, people haven't just committed evil. They've enabled it, followed it, even cheered it on. Not because they were evil, but because they were stupid. A dangerous kind of stupidity, the kind that resists truth, that rejects reason, that obeys without thought. And this, according to German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, is the greatest threat to civilization. Not evil, but stupidity itself. When we think of danger, we often think of evil, cold, calculating malice, the kind that plots and schemes, the kind that wears a mask and knows exactly what it's doing. But what if I told you that evil isn't the true enemy? What if the most catastrophic events in history, genocides, cults, dictatorships, weren't born from pure malice, but from something much quieter, much dumber, and far more contagious? Dietrich Bonhoeffer thought so. He was not just a theologian. He was a rebel, a resistor, a man who stood against the Nazi regime from inside Germany. While the world watched Hitler's horrors unfold, Bonhoeffer saw something others missed. He saw that evil was not acting alone. It had a partner, a silent accomplice: stupidity. In a letter smuggled out from prison, Bonhoeffer wrote one of the most chilling observations of the 20th century. Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than evil. It's not a metaphor, it's a diagnosis. According to Bonhoeffer, evil at least has a logic, a method. It can be confronted, argued with, fought against. Evil knows what it's doing. It has intent. But stupidity? Stupidity doesn't know, doesn't ask, doesn't care. A stupid person doesn't act with cruelty out of hatred. They act blindly, obediently, thoughtlessly, and that's what makes them so much more dangerous. Evil can be stopped with courage. Stupidity can't be stopped at all. It ignores reason, it rejects evidence, it shuts down when you speak the truth. And worst of all, it often looks like your neighbor, your teacher, your colleague. It smiles, it nods, it goes along with the crowd. Stupidity doesn't need to hate you to destroy you. It just needs to not think. Bonhoeffer believed that the horrors of Nazi Germany weren't simply the result of evil men in high places, but of millions of people who refused to think for themselves, who followed orders, who didn't ask questions, who surrendered their minds to the collective. And it's not just a German problem, it's a human one, the kind that can repeat itself again and again, unless we learn to recognize it and fight back, not with weapons, but with thought. We often confuse two things: not knowing and refusing to know. On the surface, they look the same, but in truth, they are worlds apart. Ignorance is passive. It's innocent. It means you simply haven't been told yet. Stupidity, on the other hand, is defiant, aggressive, willful. Dietrich Bonhoeffer understood this distinction like few others. In his writings, he made it crystal clear. Ignorance can be cured, but stupidity is immune. You see, an ignorant person, when presented with evidence, can learn. They might be unaware of the facts, but once they're shown, they listen, they absorb, they evolve. But the stupid person, they don't just lack facts, they actively reject them. They will not listen, they will not update their beliefs. Even if you lay out undeniable proof, they'll find a way to twist it, ignore it, or accuse you of being part of the problem. And the scariest part? The more wrong they are, the more certain they become. Stupidity creates its own defense system, one that shields it from truth. It builds walls of denial, confirmation bias, and groupthink. It repeats the same phrases over and over. That's fake news. I know what I believe. You can't trust the experts. These aren't arguments. They're reflexes, designed to shut down thought and avoid discomfort. Bonhoeffer believed that stupidity is not a simple intellectual failure. It is a moral one, because to reject truth, to ignore reality when it's right in front of you, is a choice, and that choice has consequences. It leads people to believe lies, to spread them, to act on them, and suddenly, those lies aren't just words. They become laws, they become policies, they become violence. And all it takes to start the chain is one person who refuses to think. In an age where facts are instantly accessible and truth can be verified in seconds, stupidity is not a lack of access. It's a refusal to reach. And that, Bonhoeffer warns, is far more dangerous than ignorance ever could be. History doesn't just remember the evil, it remembers the silence that let it happen. The warning signs ignored, the experts dismissed, the facts buried under arrogance. Because stupidity doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it wears a suit, sits in boardrooms, signs off on disaster. Take the NASA Challenger disaster in 1986. A cold morning, a scheduled space shuttle launch, and engineers, worried, alarmed, repeatedly warned that the shuttle's O-rings would fail in low temperatures. Their data was solid, their voices were clear, but the decision makers, they didn't want delay. They wanted headlines. And so, 73 seconds after liftoff, the Challenger exploded midair. 7 lives lost, not because of ignorance, right, but because of stupidity and power. Or consider Chernobyl, the worst nuclear disaster in human history. Engineers on the ground knew the risks. They had protocols. They had doubts. But higher-ups, obsessed with speed and pride, demanded the test go forward. When alarms went off, they were silenced. When concerns rose, they were crushed. And in the end, an explosion that released radiation 400 times more powerful than Hiroshima. Entire towns poisoned, thousands dead, generations affected, not by malice, but by willful blindness. Or rewind to 2008, Wall Street, the housing market, the so-called smartest people in the room, economists, journalists, analysts, all rang the bell. It's a bubble. It will burst. But the ones in charge, they laughed because they weren't just wrong. They were sure they were right. They believed they were too powerful to fail. And when it all came crashing down, millions lost their homes, their savings, their futures. Not because no one knew, but because those who knew were ignored. Bonhoeffer would call this not a failure of intellect, but a triumph of stupidity. A kind of thinking, or rather, a refusal to think, that turns systems, leaders, and institutions into ticking time bombs. We look at history and wonder how people let these things happen. The answer is painfully simple. They didn't think, or worse, they chose not to. Stupidity is not just an individual flaw. It's not something you're born with. It's contagious. Like a virus, it spreads, quietly, invisibly, until it infects entire communities, institutions, even nations. And the most terrifying part? You don't even know it's happening. Bonhoeffer recognized this. He wrote, "When people stop thinking for themselves, they cease to be individuals. They become tools." It's called groupthink, the silent killer of truth. The moment you enter a group, a crowd, a movement, something shifts. You feel pressure to agree, pressure to belong, pressure to nod, even when everything inside you screams, no. And slowly, your thoughts stop being your own. You outsource your judgment to the collective. You stop asking, is this right? And start asking, what do others believe? And when that happens, stupidity finds its perfect breeding ground. Think of mobs. Think of cults. Think of political rallies where facts don't matter. Only slogans do. The bigger the group, the less people think, the less they resist. Propaganda doesn't work because it's persuasive. It works because it removes the need to think at all. This is why history repeats itself. Not because people forget, but because they stop thinking for themselves when it matters most. And once stupidity takes hold in a group, it feeds on itself. Each lie reinforces the next. Each person afraid to dissent strengthens the illusion, until disagreement feels like betrayal, until questioning the group becomes unthinkable, until entire societies walk off a cliff together. Bonhoeffer feared this more than bombs or guns, because evil needs followers, and stupidity supplies them in droves, not through hatred, not through violence, but through passivity, conformity, and blind obedience. And if we fail to see how easily we become part of that system, then we may already be infected too. We like to believe we are independent thinkers, that when faced with evil, we would stand tall, that we would resist. But science and history tell a different story. Most people don't need to be threatened to obey. They just need to be told, it's okay, everyone else is doing it. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram set out to answer a terrifying question. How far will ordinary people go, just because someone in authority told them to? In his experiment, participants were instructed to deliver electric shocks to a stranger every time they got a question wrong. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. They heard screams, begging, silence, and yet they kept going. Not because they were evil, but because a man in a lab coat said, please continue. Over 65% of people delivered what they believed were lethal shocks, just to obey. Then came the Asch conformity experiment. A group of people, all actors except one real participant. They were shown lines on a card and asked a simple question. Which line is the longest? The answer was obvious, but all the actors gave the wrong answer on purpose. And what did the real participant do? Over 75% of them conformed, knowingly giving the wrong answer, just to avoid standing out. Think about that. People abandoned what they saw with their own eyes just to fit in. And that's the real power of stupidity. Not that it makes people violent, but that it makes them silent. In Nazi Germany, millions didn't pull the trigger, but they looked away. They went along, they nodded, they marched, they saluted, because that's what everyone else was doing. And when no one questions, the lie becomes truth. The horror becomes normal. Bonhoeffer saw it firsthand. He watched a civilized nation, full of artists, thinkers, scientists, descend into madness. Not because they were all evil, but because they stopped thinking and started following. And the same mechanism is alive today. In politics, in media, in every viral trend that asks you to repeat, not to question. The scariest part, it works. We often assume that people at the top are the smartest, that those in power must have earned it through brilliance, strategy, and insight. But what if we're wrong? What if power doesn't attract intelligence, but kills it? Bonhoeffer believed that stupidity doesn't just live among the uneducated, it thrives in power. The more authority a person holds, the more likely they are to become trapped inside their own echo chamber. Surrounded by yes men, protected from criticism, removed from consequence. They begin to believe they are always right. Their past victories blind them to present mistakes, and slowly they lose the one thing that makes intelligence useful: self-awareness. This isn't a theory, it's history. Look at the 2008 financial crisis. Bank CEOs and executives ignored every warning about the housing bubble. Economists sounded the alarm, but those at the top, swimming in bonuses and blind confidence, kept betting everything until the world economy came crashing down, or Chernobyl. Engineers begged leadership to stop the test, but Soviet pride and authoritarian ego demanded it go on. The result? One of the worst nuclear disasters in human history, not caused by a villain, but by leaders who refuse to listen. Power doesn't just breed arrogance, it creates blind spots, places where reason dies and ego takes over. The higher someone climbs, the more they insulate themselves, not from danger, but from truth. People beneath them fear speaking up. They sugarcoat reality. They filter information until all that remains is a carefully crafted illusion. And in that illusion, stupidity grows unchecked. Bonhoeffer saw it clearly. That power, when left unchallenged, becomes the perfect host for stupidity. Because the most dangerous kind of stupid is the one that can't be told it's wrong. And when that stupidity wears a crown, holds a microphone, or signs laws into existence, it doesn't just affect the powerful, it destroys the powerless. In the past, stupidity spread slowly. It needed time, gossip. Rumors passed from mouth to ear. But today, it moves at the speed of light. One click, one share, one viral post, and a lie, a stupid, dangerous, emotionally charged lie, can circle the globe before the truth even gets out of bed. Studies show that false information spreads 6 times faster than the truth. Why? Because lies are more exciting. They shock, they anger, they confirm what we want to believe. And most importantly, they're easy. The truth is slow, complex, nuanced. But stupidity, it's simple. Just pick a headline that makes you feel right and hit share. Welcome to the age of algorithmic ignorance, where platforms are designed to keep you scrolling, not thinking. Where engagement matters more than accuracy. Where outrage is currency and stupidity pays in views. The result? Echo chambers. You see only what you already agree with. You follow people who think like you. And over time, your world shrinks. Opposing ideas don't challenge you. They enrage you. Facts don't educate you. They threaten you. You don't learn. You reinforce. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop thinking. This is how stupidity becomes systemic. Not because people are inherently dumb, but because we built a machine that rewards mindless repetition and punishes critical thought. It rewards echo, and it fears silence. In this world, the loudest voice wins, not the wisest. And so stupidity grows. It feeds off our attention. It weaponizes our emotions. It becomes not just a mistake, but a feature of the system. Bonhoeffer warned about a society where people stop thinking for themselves. He couldn't have predicted Twitter or TikTok, but he saw it coming. A world where stupidity isn't hidden in shadows, but broadcast, amplified, and monetized. And unless we break the cycle, we may one day wake up and find that truth no longer matters at all. So, is there a way out? If stupidity spreads like a virus, reinforced by power, multiplied by media, and protected by obedience, is there a cure? Bonhoeffer believed there was, but it's not easy. It requires something most people aren't taught to do. Something far more difficult than reading books, quoting facts, or shouting opinions. It requires you to think for yourself, not just occasionally, not just when it's convenient, but relentlessly, to question, to doubt, to stop before you speak and ask, do I know this is true? Am I reacting emotionally or reasoning clearly? Who benefits from me believing this? Bonhoeffer didn't see stupidity as a problem of low IQ. He saw it as a moral failure, a refusal to engage with reality. And that refusal becomes more tempting the louder the world gets. It's easier to follow the crowd than to walk alone. Easier to repeat than to reflect. Easier to obey than to resist. But progress has never come from obedience. It comes from dissent. From those who asked questions when everyone else stayed silent. From those who challenged authority, even when it cost them everything. From those who were willing to be wrong in the pursuit of what's right. To defeat stupidity, we must do more than gather facts. We must build the courage to face truths we don't like. We must read opinions we disagree with. Debate without attacking. Learn without ego. And most of all, we must reclaim our minds from the noise. Because the real danger isn't what stupidity does to society. It's what it silently takes from you. your ability to think, your freedom to question, your responsibility to decide. Bonhoeffer believed that even in the darkest regimes, even surrounded by lies and death, a free mind is still possible. And that freedom is where resistance begins. Stupidity doesn't need a plan. It doesn't need hatred. It doesn't need a motive. It only needs one thing: for you to stop thinking. That's how it spreads. That's how history's darkest moments begin. Not with evil roaring, but with reason quietly falling asleep. Bonhoeffer understood this better than most. He watched his country collapse under the weight of blind obedience. He saw neighbors turn into informants, teachers become propagandists, churches become tools of the state, not because everyone was evil, but because too many were simply silent. They didn't ask, they didn't doubt, they didn't think, and by the time they realized what they had allowed, it was too late. Evil does not always storm through the gates. Sometimes it walks through the front door, carried by good people who never pause to ask why. And so the most powerful resistance, the one Bonhoeffer gave his life for, is not violence. It is not revolution. It is the act of thinking independently. Every time you question a lie, every time you read beyond the headline, every time you admit, "I don't know," and go searching, you are fighting stupidity, and you are keeping civilization alive. So before you share that post, before you join that crowd, before you speak or stay silent, pause and ask, am I thinking or am I just following? Because history has shown us again and again, the greatest tragedies weren't committed by monsters. They were committed by ordinary people who chose not to think. What do you think? Do you agree with Bonhoeffer's warning? Have you ever caught yourself blindly following the crowd, even when something didn't feel right? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have the courage to reflect out loud. Let's break the cycle, one thought at a time. And if this message resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to PsycheX, and share this with someone who still believes in the power of critical thought. Because in a world drowning in noise, choosing to think is an act of revolution.